The morning sun touched the tall buildings of Crestwood Academy, lighting up the polished floors and glass windows that seemed too perfect for anyone who didn't belong. Students walked through the gates in shiny shoes and branded jackets, laughing loudly as cars with tinted windows dropped them off. Among all the noise and the expensive perfume smell, one boy stood quietly at the gate, holding his worn backpack with both hands. His name was Eli Turner. Eli's shoes were clean but old. The laces were frayed and the fabric near his toes had started to thin. His uniform didn't fit quite right. The sleeves were a little too short, and the color had faded from being washed too many times. Still, he walked with a quiet sort of pride. He knew what people thought of him, but he didn't let it show. He was the scholarship kid, the one who didn't come from money. Everyone knew his story. His father had once been a small-town music teacher, and after losing his job, their family had fallen into debt. Eli's mother worked double shifts now, trying to pay bills that never seemed to stop. People whispered that the Turners owed money all over town. The rumor spread through the school like wildfire, and though Eli never talked about it, he could feel the weight of it every single day. In the hallway, voices echoed. "Hey, Eli," one of the boys called out, grinning. "Need a loan for lunch today?" The group of students around him burst into laughter. Eli smiled weakly and kept walking, pretending not to hear. It was easier that way. Every time he tried to defend himself, the teasing only got worse. So he stayed silent, focused on his studies, and tried to fade into the background. Crestwood was a world that sparkled, and Eli felt like a shadow walking through it. The music room was the only place where he felt a little safe. He loved the smell of old wood and sheet music. The piano in the corner, glossy and grand, looked like a treasure from another world. He never touched it, though, not in front of anyone. He didn't want to give them another reason to laugh. One Thursday morning, their music teacher, Mr. Grant, a man with silver hair and kind eyes, walked into class with a big smile. He clapped his hands together and said, "All right, everyone, listen up. We're planning something special this year. The school will host a charity concert next month. All of you will have a chance to perform. It's a big event. Parents, donors, and local media will attend." The room buzzed with excitement. The students began talking all at once, throwing around ideas about what they could perform. In the back row, Eli sat quietly, his pencil spinning in his hand. He loved music, it ran through his veins, but he knew how these things worked. The charity concert wasn't for kids like him. It was for the ones with fancy clothes, parents with connections, and confidence that came from never having to worry about anything. Still, when Mr. Grant asked, "Who's interested in performing?" Eli's hand twitched slightly. He wanted to raise it, but before he could, one of the boys in front of him, Liam, the mayor's son, turned around and smirked. "Oh, come on," Liam said loudly. Imagine Eli playing the debt collector's anthem on stage. The class erupted in laughter. Even some of the quieter students tried to hide their smiles. Mr. Grant frowned and said, "That's enough, Liam." But the damage was already done. Eli lowered his head, staring at his notebook, his ears burning. When the bell rang, the students packed their things. Liam brushed past Eli and said under his breath, "Maybe you can collect donations for your family at the concert." His friends laughed again. Eli didn't respond. He just walked out, heading straight for the back door that led to the small courtyard. There, under the shade of an old oak tree, he finally let himself breathe. He opened his backpack, took out a sandwich his mother had made, and sat down. From where he sat, he could hear the faint sound of a piano coming from the open window of the music room. Someone was practicing scales, their fingers pressing the keys in perfect rhythm. The sound carried across the courtyard like a whisper of something he once loved but now kept hidden. Eli had grown up around music. His father had taught him how to play on an old upright piano they'd bought secondhand. Back then, their house had been filled with laughter and melody. His father used to say, "Music doesn't need money, Eli. It just needs honesty." But that was before everything changed, before bills piled up, before arguments filled the nights, and before his father's smile disappeared under the weight of debt. Now the piano in their small apartment was scratched and out of tune, but Eli still played it. Late at night, when his mother was asleep and the city had gone quiet, he would sit at that piano and let his fingers wander. It was the only time he didn't feel like the boy in debt. Back in school, though, he kept that part of himself locked away. The next week, posters went up around the hallways for the charity concert. Auditions in 2 weeks, they read in bold letters. Everyone was talking about it. Some students were planning dance performances. Others were preparing songs. Liam, of course, had already announced that he would play the violin, and his friends cheered like he'd already won. Maybe you can sweep the stage before the show. One of them joked to Eli when they passed him in the hallway. Eli didn't look up. He had learned that silence was his best shield. That afternoon, he stayed back after class to clean the whiteboard. Mr. Grant noticed him and said, "Eli, do you play any instruments?" Eli froze for a second. "A little," he said softly. Mr. Grant smiled. "A little is more than none. You should audition. I've seen your work. You have a good ear for music." Eli shrugged, trying to sound casual. "I don't think I'm good enough." The teacher tilted his head. "Sometimes it's not about being good enough for others, but being honest with yourself. Think about it, all right?" Eli nodded politely and packed his things. But as he walked home that day, his mind wouldn't stop replaying those words. Their apartment was small, 2 rooms above a bakery that always smelled of bread. His mother was already home, sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by unopened envelopes. She smiled when he walked in, but her eyes looked tired. "Hey, sweetheart," she said. "How was school?" "Fine," he said, forcing a smile. He didn't tell her about the jokes or the concert. She already had enough to worry about. That night after dinner, he went to the corner of the living room where their old piano stood. The wood was scratched and a few keys stuck when pressed, but he still loved it. He sat down, placed his fingers gently on the keys, and began to play. The notes were soft at first, unsure, almost shy. Then they grew stronger, flowing like a story only he could tell. Every sound carried something inside him. The hurt, the quiet hope, the longing to be more than what people thought he was. As he played, his mother leaned in the doorway, listening. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. For those few minutes, their tired little home felt warm again. At school, the teasing continued. The whispers followed him in the cafeteria, in the locker room, even in the library. Some days he wanted to disappear completely, but every night when he sat at the piano, something inside him kept whispering back, "Don't stop." 2 days before the audition deadline, Eli stood in front of the sign-up sheet outside the music room. His hands trembled slightly. There were already dozens of names written neatly on the list. He hesitated, looking at the blank space at the bottom. Then he picked up the pen and wrote his name. Behind him, Liam's voice rang out. "Well, well," he said. "Didn't know they were letting anyone audition this year." Eli didn't respond. He just walked away. But deep inside, something had shifted. For the first time, he wasn't running from what people thought of him. He was walking toward something that mattered, something that had always been his. That night, he played until his fingers ached. He didn't have sheet music or fancy lessons, just memory and heart. He practiced until he knew every note by touch, not sight. And when he finally stopped, his mother came out from the kitchen holding a cup of tea. "You're really going to do it, aren't you?" she asked. He looked at her and nodded. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I think I have to." She smiled, a tired but proud smile, and placed the cup beside him. "Then do it for you, not for them." Eli sat there long after she went to bed, staring at the piano keys in the dim light. Tomorrow would be another ordinary day at Crestwood Academy, filled with whispers and laughter he wasn't part of. But soon there would be a stage, a piano, and a chance. He didn't know what would happen. He didn't know if anyone would care. But for once, that didn't matter, because deep down, Eli believed something his father had told him long ago, that music could speak louder than words, and sometimes louder than judgment, and maybe, just maybe, it was time to let it speak. The weekend before the auditions arrived quietly. The streets were wet from a light rain, and the air smelled of bread from the bakery below their apartment. Inside, the small living room looked the same as always, tidy but tired. A few books were stacked neatly near the window, and the old piano stood against the wall, its wood darkened from age. Eli sat in front of it, fingers hovering above the keys. The house was silent except for the soft ticking of the clock and the hum of the refrigerator. His mother was asleep in the other room, exhausted from her night shift. He didn't want to wake her, so he played softly, each note careful and gentle. It was strange how the piano seemed to listen to him. It had big eye. His best friend, the only thing that never asked questions or judged him. The sound filled the room like a warm blanket. He played until the sky turned from dark to gray, and light started to slip through the curtains. He didn't know what song to play for the audition yet. Every piece he tried felt either too simple or too proud. He wanted something honest, something that showed who he really was. After hours of trying, he stopped, leaned back, and closed his eyes. He remembered his father sitting right where he was now, years ago, tapping his fingers against the same keys. His father's voice echoed faintly in his memory. "When you play, don't think about being perfect. Just tell the truth." Eli smiled softly at the memory. He missed him. He spent the rest of the weekend practicing. His mother watched quietly from the kitchen sometimes, her eyes full of worry and pride mixed together. She didn't say much, just made sure he ate and rested. On Sunday night, as he packed his school bag, she placed a hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone," she said softly. "I know," he replied, "but I want to." The next morning, Crestwood Academy looked brighter than usual. Maybe it was the sunlight bouncing off the glass windows, or maybe it was just Eli's heart beating a little faster. The sign-up sheet for auditions had been taken down, and a schedule was posted in its place. His name was there, Eli Turner, piano performance, slotted for Wednesday afternoon. When he saw it, a small rush of nerves hit him. It was real now. By lunchtime, everyone seemed to know. News traveled fast in Crestwood. Some students were curious, others laughed behind his back. He could hear their whispers when he passed by. "Can you believe he's actually auditioning? What's he going to play, the sound of overdue bills?" He ignored them, pretending to scroll on his phone while sitting alone at the cafeteria table. But inside, every word felt heavy. Later that day, during music class, Mr. Grant reminded everyone about the auditions. "Remember, this concert isn't just about skill," he said, pacing in front of the piano. "It's about heart. It's about giving something honest to the audience." Eli looked down at his notebook, his pen motionless. He wondered if heart was enough when you didn't have fancy lessons or years of training like the others. After class, Liam and his friends were gathered near the lockers. Eli walked past quietly, but they noticed him. "So you really think you can pull this off?" Liam asked, leaning against the wall with a smirk. "Just remember, this concert is to impress donors, not tell sad stories." Eli didn't answer. He just kept walking, pretending he didn't hear. But when he turned the corner, his hands were trembling slightly. That night, back home, he sat down at the piano again. The same old piano that had seen every part of his life, the good days and the hard ones. He ran his fingers lightly over the keys, then started to play a piece his father used to love. It was slow, filled with emotion, but also strength. Every note seemed to speak for him, all the words he couldn't say at school. When he finished, he felt a calm he hadn't felt in weeks. He decided that would be his audition piece. Not something famous or complicated, but something real, something that came from his heart. The next 2 days passed in a blur. He practiced every evening until his fingers ached. He didn't have anyone to teach him technique or posture, but he had something stronger: purpose. His mother watched quietly from the doorway each night, sometimes humming softly to the music. On Wednesday morning, he woke up early, too nervous to eat breakfast. The walk to school felt longer than usual. The air was cool and the sky was cloudy, as if it might rain again. When he reached the gates, students were already gathered, buzzing with excitement. Some were rehearsing lines, others adjusting their outfits for their auditions. Eli tried to stay calm. He went through his classes quietly, barely speaking. When the lunch bell rang, he didn't join anyone in the cafeteria. Instead, he walked to the empty music room. The piano sat in the middle of the stage, shining under the lights. He walked up to it, touched the smooth surface, and took a deep breath. He imagined the seats filled with people, imagined the whispers fading away as the first note began. The thought made his heart pound harder, but also gave him courage. He played softly, practicing the opening part of his piece one more time. The room echoed with sound, and warm and gentle. For those few minutes, he wasn't nervous anymore. When the real audition time came, he stood outside the music hall with a few other students. Everyone looked so confident, chatting about their pieces. Eli kept his eyes on the floor, trying to steady his breathing. Then Mr. Grant opened the door and said, "Next, Eli Turner." Eli stepped inside. The room was half lit, with a few teachers sitting in the front row, clipboards in their hands. Liam and some of his friends were in the audience too, waiting for their turns. He could feel their eyes on him as he walked toward the piano. He pulled out the bench and sat down. His hands felt cold. For a second, he just stared at the keys, the white and black shapes blurring together. "Whenever you're ready," Mr. Grant said gently. Eli took a deep breath and placed his fingers on the keys. The first note was soft, almost too soft. But then the second came and the third, and soon the melody began to flow. He played the piece his father had loved, a tune that told a story without words. It began slow and thoughtful, then grew bolder, filled with feeling. Every time his fingers struck the keys, it was like he was letting go of something heavy inside. For a while, he forgot about the room, the teachers, the laughter. He forgot about the debt, the teasing, the stares. It was just him and the piano, just sound and truth. When the final note faded, the room was silent. No one moved. Eli looked up slowly, unsure what to expect. Then Mr. Grant smiled. Not a polite teacher's smile, but a real one. "Thank you, Eli," he said quietly. "That was beautiful." Eli nodded, stood up, and walked off the stage. He didn't wait for anyone's reaction. His legs felt shaky, his heart racing. As he stepped into the hallway, he heard a voice behind him. Liam's. "Not bad," Liam said, his tone casual but his eyes uneasy. "Didn't expect that," Eli didn't reply. He just walked away. But for the first time, Liam's voice didn't sound like mockery. It sounded like surprise. That night, Eli came home and told his mother everything. She listened quietly, her hands folded in her lap. When he finished, she said softly, "Your father would be proud." He smiled. "I hope so." They ate dinner together, just soup and bread, but it felt like a celebration. For once, the air in the small apartment didn't feel heavy. It felt alive. The next few days were long. The list of selected performers would be posted on Monday. Every time Eli passed the bulletin board, his stomach tightened. He tried not to think about it, but it was all he could think about. Over the weekend, he played again and again, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Each time he played, he remembered how it felt to sit on that stage. How for a few minutes, everything else disappeared. On Monday morning, when he reached the school gates, a crowd had already gathered around the board. Students were whispering, pointing, taking pictures. Eli pushed through gently, his heart pounding. When he finally reached the front, his eyes scanned the list, and there it was. Eli Turner, piano performance, approved. For a second, he just stared. Then he felt something warm rise in his chest, and not pride exactly, but relief. All the laughter, all the whispers, they didn't matter anymore. He had earned his place. Behind him, he heard Liam's voice again. "Guess they needed someone to make the donors cry," he said lightly. His friends laughed, but it sounded weak this time, forced. Eli didn't turn around. He didn't need to. He just smiled quietly and walked away. That afternoon, he sat in the courtyard under the old oak tree, the same place he used to hide from everyone. But now it felt different. The sky looked brighter, the air lighter. For the first time, he felt like maybe he belonged. Not because of money or clothes, but because of who he was. He didn't know what would happen at the concert. Maybe people would still judge him. Maybe they wouldn't care. But one thing had changed. He cared about himself now. He believed that what he had to say through music mattered. And that belief, small and quiet as it was, felt stronger than all the laughter in the world. The week of the concert came faster than Eli expected. The school hallways buzzed with excitement. Posters were everywhere, showing the names of the performers. Some students walked around with instruments. Others rehearsed songs in small groups during lunch breaks. It felt like everyone was part of something big. Eli kept mostly to himself. He didn't like drawing attention. But now people looked at him differently. Some still whispered behind his back, but not as loudly as before. A few even smiled politely when they saw him, though he could tell it was mostly curiosity. He could feel that something had changed, not in them, but in him. For the first time, he didn't walk through the halls wishing to disappear. He walked with quiet confidence, like someone who had finally found a piece of himself. Still, he couldn't stop thinking about the performance. Every night, he practiced the same piece over and over, making sure every note felt alive. His mother listened from the kitchen, sometimes stopping her work just to watch him play. "You know," she said one evening, smiling softly, "when you play, this whole place feels different." Eli looked up. "Different how?" "Warmer," she said. Like your father's? Here again, her words stayed with him. Every note he played after that seemed to carry a part of his father's memory. At school, rehearsals began. Each performer had to test their equipment and practice on stage. When Eli's turn came, he walked into the auditorium with his sheet music folded neatly in his hand. The hall was huge, bigger than he'd imagined. Rows and rows of empty chairs stretched out in front of the stage. The lights were bright, almost blinding. He sat at the piano, took a deep breath, and placed his fingers on the keys. The sound echoed beautifully in the open room. It felt different from playing at home, fuller, louder, almost alive. Mr. Grant, who was organizing the concert, nodded from the front row. "Good, Eli," he said. "Remember, don't rush the beginning. Let it breathe." Eli nodded, started again, and this time the melody flowed smoother. When he finished, Mr. Grant smiled. "You've come a long way," he said. "Thank you," Eli replied quietly. As he got up to leave, he noticed Liam sitting a few rows back with his violin case beside him. Their eyes met briefly. Liam looked away first. Outside the auditorium, Eli heard a few students talking. "Did you hear him play?" one of them whispered. "He's actually good." "Yeah, I didn't expect that from him," another replied. Eli didn't stop to listen. He just smiled to himself and walked on. The next few days passed quickly. The concert was all anyone talked about. The teachers were preparing decorations. The art students were painting banners, and the cafeteria staff were setting up tables for refreshments. Even the principal seemed excited. At home, his mother had found an old suit of his father's and took it to a local tailor to fix. It was simple, dark gray, a little worn but clean and neat. When she showed it to Eli, his throat tightened. "It's not new," she said softly, "but it's the suit your father wore when he played his first concert." Eli touched the fabric gently. "It's perfect," he said. The night before the concert, he couldn't sleep. He sat by the window looking at the city lights. His heart felt heavy but full of memories, fear, hope, and something else he couldn't name. He knew this wasn't just a school performance for him. It was his chance to show who he really was. Not the boy people pitied, not the one they mocked, but the person his father believed in. When morning came, the air was cool and clear. The concert would start in the evening, but students were asked to arrive early. Eli carried his sheet music carefully in his backpack. At school, the atmosphere buzzed with nervous energy. Some students were pacing the hallways, others warming up their voices or instruments. The stage crew ran around with cables and microphones. Mr. Grant was everywhere, giving last-minute directions. "Relax, everyone," he said, clapping his hands. "This isn't about being perfect. It's about enjoying the music." Eli smiled faintly at that. He found a quiet corner backstage where he could wait alone. He opened his backpack, took out his father's old photo, the one where he was standing beside the same piano, smiling proudly. Eli held it for a moment and whispered, "I hope you're watching." Then he put it away and sat still, breathing slowly. The auditorium filled up as the evening went on. Parents, teachers, and even a few local guests took their seats. The lights dimmed, and the show began. One by one, students performed. There were singers, dancers, violinists, and even a small band. The crowd cheered after each act. Eli peeked through the curtain, his hands sweating slightly. He could see his mother sitting near the back, her hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the stage. Finally, he heard his name. "And now," the host said into the microphone, "please welcome Eli Turner, performing a piano piece dedicated to his late father." Eli took a deep breath and stepped into the light. The room fell silent. He walked to the piano, pulled out the bench, and sat down. His heart was pounding so hard he could almost hear it. For a moment, he just sat there, his fingers resting gently on the keys. Then he remembered what his father used to say, "Tell the truth through music." He began to play. The first notes were soft, fragile, almost like a whisper. But as the melody grew, something inside him opened. Every sound carried emotion, sadness, love, hope. The music spoke where words couldn't. The audience leaned in, listening closely. Eli's fingers moved with grace and power. The world outside disappeared. It was just him, the piano, and the story he was telling. The story of his father, his mother, their struggles, and the quiet strength that kept them going. By the time the final note faded into silence, the entire hall was still. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then slowly the applause began, soft at first, then louder until it filled the room. People stood up, clapping, cheering. Eli looked up, dazed. He saw Mr. Grant smiling proudly in the front row. He saw his mother wiping tears from her eyes. And somewhere in the middle of the crowd he saw Liam, standing, clapping, not out of pity but respect. Eli bowed his head slightly, then left the stage quietly. His hands were trembling, but his heart felt lighter than ever before. Backstage, a few students came up to him. "That was amazing," one said. "I didn't know you could play like that." "Yeah," another added. "You made half the audience cry." Eli smiled shyly. "Thanks," he said, not knowing what else to say. When the concert ended, people were still talking about his performance. Teachers congratulated him. Parents came up to shake his hand, and Mr. Grant said quietly, "You reminded everyone what real music feels like." Eli didn't know how to respond. He just nodded and smiled. Outside the hall, his mother was waiting. When she saw him, she didn't say a word. She just hugged him tightly, and he felt her shoulders shake. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. "Your father would be too." He hugged her back, his eyes stinging. "I just played what I felt," he said softly. They walked home together that night under the streetlights. The world seemed quieter, calmer. For the first time, Eli didn't feel small or out of place. He felt seen. The next morning, when he arrived at school, people greeted him differently. Some smiled, some nodded respectfully. Some even stopped to say congratulations. It was strange, but nice. The same hallways that used to feel heavy now felt open. Even Liam approached him near the lockers. He hesitated for a moment, then said, "You played really well last night. Guess I was wrong about you." Eli looked at him surprised. "Thanks," he said simply. Liam nodded awkwardly. "Yeah, see you around." Then he walked off. It wasn't friendship, but it was something. Maybe understanding. That afternoon, Mr. Grant called Eli to his office. When Eli walked in, the teacher handed him a letter. "Someone from the concert asked about you," he said with a small smile. Eli frowned slightly. "Asked about me?" Mr. Grant nodded. "A woman who attended last night's event. She's from the city's music foundation. She said your performance reminded her of a pianist she once knew." Eli's heart skipped. "Who?" Mr. Grant smiled softly. "Your father." Eli stared at him, speechless. "She wants to meet you," Mr. Grant continued. "She might have an opportunity for you. A scholarship, maybe more. I'll let her contact you directly." Eli walked out of the office in a daze. The hallway felt brighter than ever. He didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time it didn't scare him. That night he sat once again at the old piano in their small apartment. His mother was reading quietly on the couch. He placed his fingers on the keys and began to play. The notes filled the room, soft and warm. The same piano that had seen their struggles was now carrying their hope. Eli didn't know if his life was about to change, but he knew one thing for sure. He had found his voice. And he would never hide it again. The following week brought a mix of excitement and nervousness that Eli had never experienced before. The message from the Music Foundation had arrived, and it was real. A woman named Clara had requested to meet him to discuss opportunities. He wasn't entirely sure what to expect. Would she judge him? Would she see a boy in debt or a talented pianist? He tried not to think too much as he walked to the meeting place, a small, elegant music academy downtown. The city felt different that day. Cars hummed softly along the streets, people moved quickly in all directions, and the buildings stretched taller than anything he had grown up with. Eli gripped his backpack tightly, a mix of fear and hope running through him. His mother had insisted he dress neatly, and he wore the dark gray suit that once belonged to his father. It still had the faint smell of old fabric and memories, but it fit him well enough. When he arrived, a receptionist greeted him politely and led him to a waiting room filled with grand pianos and framed photographs of famous musicians. Eli felt small in the room. The walls were adorned with golden awards and certificates. He had never been anywhere like this in his life. After a few minutes, a woman entered the room. She was tall, with soft features, and her presence carried a quiet authority. She smiled warmly at Eli, and for the first time that day, he felt a little less nervous. "You must be Eli," she said, extending her hand. "Yes," he replied, shaking it gently. "I'm Clara," she said. "I was at the charity concert last week. I couldn't stop thinking about your performance. You have something very special." Eli's cheeks flushed. "Thank you," he whispered. Clara gestured toward the piano in the corner. "Would you mind playing for me again? I'd love to hear your piece one more time." Eli hesitated for a moment, then walked over to the piano. He opened his backpack and took out his sheet music, placing it carefully on the stand. His finger first hovered over the keys as he took a deep breath. He reminded himself not to think about what would happen after, just the music. As he played, the room seemed to disappear. The walls, the awards, even Clara faded from his awareness. There was only the piano and the story he poured into it. Each note carried memories, his father's lessons, his mother's sacrifices, and the hope that had kept him going through so many difficult days. When he finished, the last note lingering in the air, Clara sat in silence for a moment. Then she leaned forward, her eyes bright. "That was incredible," she said softly. "Your father would be proud of you. In fact, you remind me so much of him. You have his soul in your playing." Eli's throat tightened. He looked down at his hands, trembling slightly. I just play what I feel," he said quietly. "That's exactly why you're good," Clara replied. "Talent is important, but heart is what people remember. And you have it in abundance." She handed him a folder. Inside were forms and information about a full scholarship at her academy, along with additional programs that could help him refine his skills. Eli stared at it, disbelief written across his face. This is real?" he asked. Clara smiled. "Yes, it's real. I want to give you a chance to pursue your gift. I know what it's like to have potential but not the means. You deserve this opportunity, Eli." He nodded slowly, a mixture of excitement and fear swirling inside him. He wanted to say something, but words felt too small for the moment. After the meeting, Clara offered to give him a tour of the academy. They walked through hallways filled with students practicing, classrooms lined with instruments, and small performance rooms where the walls were covered with mirrors. Everywhere Eli looked, music seemed to live and breathe. "This is amazing," he whispered. "I've never seen anything like this before." Clara laughed softly. "You'll get used to it, and soon you'll be sharing your music with others who love it just as much as you do." As he left the academy, Eli felt a strange mix of relief and responsibility. The scholarship was an incredible opportunity, but it also meant leaving home, leaving the familiar, and stepping into a world he had never truly known. He walked through the city streets, replaying the meeting over and over in his mind. When he returned home that evening, his mother was waiting with dinner. She smiled when she saw him, but the worry in her eyes remained. "Well?" she asked, carefully placing the plate on the table. Eli set the folder on the table and opened it. "It's real, Mom," he said. "They want me to study there. I can really do this." Her eyes welled up, and she reached across the table to squeeze his hand. "I knew you could. Your father always believed in you, even when it was hard, and so do I." They ate together in quiet celebration. It wasn't fancy, just the two of them sharing a simple meal. But for Eli, it felt like a victory he had earned through years of struggle. The following days were filled with preparation. He practiced harder than ever, perfecting every nuance of his piece. He also began learning more about what would be expected of him at the academy. There would be new techniques, theory classes, and performances in front of demanding audiences. The thought was intimidating, but it also sparked a fire in him. At school, things had changed as well. His performance at the charity concert had made waves. Students who had once mocked him now looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and admiration. Some still whispered behind his back, but he had learned to ignore it. He walked the halls with quiet confidence, no longer shrinking from their stares. Even Liam approached him again, this time hesitating before speaking. "Hey, I just wanted to say you really played beautifully. I didn't think you could do that." Eli nodded. "Thanks." Liam hesitated for a moment longer before walking away. It wasn't friendship yet, but it was a small acknowledgement, and it mattered more than Eli expected. That night he returned home and sat at his piano. The room felt peaceful, the air soft with the evening light. He played for hours, pouring all of his nervous energy, excitement, and hope into the music. Each note reminded him of how far he had come and how much further he could go. His mother watched from the doorway, smiling but keeping her eyes on him softly. She didn't want to disturb his focus, but she felt a quiet pride swell in her chest. "Your father would be proud," she whispered again, almost to herself. The days passed quickly, and soon it was time for the first meeting at the music academy. Clara had arranged for him to meet other students and teachers, get familiar with the building, and start understanding the expectations of the program. Eli arrived early, as always. He wanted to be prepared, to make a good impression, and most of all, to show that he was serious. Clara greeted him warmly and introduced him to a few other students. Some were older, some younger, but all had a natural ease with music that made him feel slightly out of place. "Don't worry," Clara said when she noticed him hesitating. "You belong here as much as anyone. Talent isn't measured by what you look like or where you come from. You've already proven that." Eli smiled, feeling a little lighter. He followed her through the classrooms and practice halls. In one room, a group of students were working on a piece for an upcoming recital. Their fingers moved across the keys with confidence, their eyes focused, their expressions serious. Eli watched quietly, absorbing everything. In another room, a teacher demonstrated techniques on the piano. The student watching beside him turned to Eli and whispered, "You're going to fit in here fast. You have something." Eli nodded, unsure what to say. He was grateful, but he didn't feel like he belonged just yet. He still carried the weight of years of being underestimated. After the tour, Clara handed him a small schedule. "Take your time to explore, practice, and get comfortable. We'll start classes officially next week." Eli nodded, clutching the schedule carefully. He had a lot to learn, but for the first time in a long time, he felt ready. Walking back to his apartment, he felt the city around him differently. It wasn't intimidating anymore. It felt full of possibilities. Each step he took seemed to carry him closer to a future he had never imagined. That night, he played at home again, letting the music carry him. He played softly at first, then louder, then softly again, experimenting with rhythms and emotions. Every note felt alive, a small affirmation that he had made it this far. His mother came to watch, her eyes shining with pride. "Keep going," she said quietly. "This is just the beginning." Eli smiled, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. He knew there would be challenges, that some days would be harder than others, but for now he allowed himself to feel hope, real hope. And as his fingers danced across the keys, the small apartment filled with a sound that carried their past, present, and future all at once. The sound of a boy who had found his courage, his music, and the beginning of a new chapter in his life. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of lessons, practice, and small performances at the academy. Eli quickly discovered that this world was different from anything he had ever known. The students around him were talented, confident, and polished. But instead of feeling out of place, he found himself inspired. Their skills were impressive, but he knew one thing: he had heart. Every time he played, every time he poured himself into the piano, he could feel that heart shining through. His teachers noticed it too. Clara watched him closely, offering guidance but never criticism that would make him doubt himself. "You have something most people spend years trying to find," she said during one lesson. "Don't lose it chasing perfection. Let it grow naturally." Eli took those words to heart. Every day he practiced relentlessly, sometimes until his fingers ached, but he did so with joy instead of pressure. He experimented with new techniques, learned about theory, and explored pieces that were far more complex than anything he had attempted before. The piano, once a simple escape in a small apartment, had become a bridge to a world he had only dreamed of. Back at school, news of his performance and scholarship spread like wildfire. Teachers spoke highly of him, and some students who had mocked him before now looked at him with quiet respect. Not everyone, of course. Some whispers and stares remained, but Eli had learned long ago that their opinions didn't define him. He had music, and that was enough. The biggest challenge came in the form of an upcoming citywide recital, a competition that brought together the best young musicians from various schools and academies. Clara encouraged him to participate. "This will be a true test," she said, "not to see if you can win, but to see how far your music can reach." Eli agreed, though nerves gnawed at him in the days leading up to the event. The night before the recital, he barely slept. He kept running the piece over and over in his mind, imagining the audience, the lights, the silence that followed the first note. He wondered if he would falter, if he would forget, if the years of being underestimated would creep back into his mind. But when morning came, he felt a quiet determination. He dressed carefully in the same dark gray suit, polished the old shoes his mother had helped him fix, and took the subway to the recital hall with Clara. The hall was enormous. filled with people, their faces glowing with anticipation. Students were warming up, their instruments ready, their expressions tense and focused. Backstage, Eli took a deep breath. Clara handed him a small bottle of water and smiled reassuringly. "Remember," she said, "play for yourself first. The rest will follow." He nodded. The words sank deep into his chest, and for a moment he closed his eyes and thought of his father. The lessons, the encouragement, the quiet belief that music could speak louder than words. Eli placed his fingers on the piano keys, feeling the familiar weight, the cool smoothness of the black and white, and then lifted them slightly, ready to begin. When it was his turn, the hall fell silent. The lights were bright, but he ignored them. He ignored the audience. All that existed was the music, flowing from his memory and heart through his fingers. The first notes were gentle, almost hesitant, but then they strengthened, filling the hall with emotion. Eli played with everything he had learned over the past weeks. The techniques, the melodies, the subtle touches that made the music alive. Every chord told a story of struggle, hope, loss, and love. By the time he reached the middle of the piece, the audience was completely absorbed. People leaned forward, eyes wide, some biting their lips to hold back tears. Eli played as if he were speaking directly to each of them, sharing not just music but a part of his life. When the final note rang out, there was a moment of silence so complete that it felt like the world had stopped. Then the applause erupted. It started softly, then swelled into a thunderous wave. People stood, clapping, cheering, some with tears in their eyes. Eli's chest swelled with relief and pride. He had done it. Not for anyone else, but for himself, for his father, and for every quiet soul that had been underestimated. Clara rushed onto the stage, clapping and smiling. "That was extraordinary," she said. "You've outdone yourself." Eli stood and bowed, his hands shaking slightly. He looked out at the audience and saw familiar faces. His mother smiling and wiping away tears, and even a few classmates from school, some of whom had once mocked him. They clapped, some hesitantly, but it didn't matter. The music had spoken louder than words ever could. After the recital, Clara introduced him to a few judges and city music representatives. They praised his talent and offered opportunities to perform at other events and workshops. Eli felt overwhelmed but exhilarated. His life was changing, and it all began with a piano, a melody, and belief in himself. Returning home that evening, Eli's mother hugged him tightly. "I am so proud of you," she said, her voice shaking. "You've shown everyone what we always knew, that your heart is stronger than any fear." Eli smiled softly, feeling the weight of the past lift slightly from his shoulders. "I couldn't have done it without you," he said. "You believed in me when no one else did." In the weeks that followed, Eli's world began to shift. He continued his studies at the academy, performing at small events and practicing relentlessly. He also noticed subtle changes at school. Teachers treated him with respect. Students who had been distant now approached him with curiosity, and even Liam started nodding politely when he passed. It wasn't about revenge or proving them wrong. It was simply that Eli had grown into his own. One evening, as he played the piano at home, his mother came to sit beside him. The room was quiet, lit only by the soft glow of a lamp. "You've come a long way," she said softly. "I see the same determination in you that your father had." Eli looked at her, fingers still resting on the keys. "I feel like I'm finally starting to live the life he wanted for me," he said. "Not because of money or status, but because of music, because of heart." His mother nodded. That's all that ever mattered. Eli played for hours that night, letting the music fill every corner of the apartment, letting it carry the past and present together. The piano had become more than an instrument. It was a bridge to the life he wanted, a testament to perseverance and a reminder of love and belief. Months later, Eli was invited to perform at a citywide youth music festival. He was nervous, but he felt ready. On the night of the festival, he took the stage, saw the bright lights, and thought of his journey. Every mock, every whispered word, every late night of practice, every moment he doubted himself. And then he played. The music soared, rich and powerful, echoing through the hall. People were captivated. Some were moved to tears. Others smiled softly, understanding the story being told without words. And in the front row, his mother watched with pride. Clara nodded approvingly. And even a few faces from Crestwood Academy looked at him in awe. When the last note faded, the applause was deafening. Eli bowed, feeling a sense of accomplishment that no one could take away. For once, he wasn't the boy in debt, the scholarship kid, or the one who didn't belong. He was a musician, a son, a boy who had turned struggle into strength, pain into beauty, and dreams into reality. Walking off the stage that night, Eli felt a quiet certainty inside him. He knew there would be challenges ahead, that the world wouldn't always be easy, but he also knew this. Nothing could stop a heart that truly believed. Nothing could silence a soul that had found its voice. And as he returned home, carrying the echoes of the audience's applause in his heart, Eli realized that this was only the beginning. The boy who had been mocked, the boy who had feared the world, had become a young man who knew his worth, who played not for others, but for the truth inside him. He looked at the piano in the corner of the room, touched its keys gently and smiled. The journey had been long, but it had led him here, to music, to hope, to life lived fully. And he knew that no matter what happened next, he would always carry the lessons, the love, and the courage that had brought him this far. Eli Turner had finally found his voice, and the world would never forget it.